Welcome to Politics Done Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We are going to have a great show for you today. Folks, let me tell you, before I even get started with the show, there is a piece of video that I clipped out, I think it was yesterday, that I want to play for you, either yesterday or the day before. It was a question to the president about whether he can control what the states are going to do as far as bringing people back into the economy. But I don't want to say opening the economy, because I was pretty much told today by our guest of the day that we need to change that narrative. It's not about opening the economy again, but let's leave that for a little bit later. The fact of the matter is, the president thinks he is a king. I want you to listen to this, and then we'll take it on the other side.
If a governor issued a stay-at-home
When you
order,
say my authority, the president's authority, not mine, because it's not me. This is when somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total. When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total. And that's the way it's got to be.
your authority is total.
It's total. It's
Your
total.
authority
And the
is
governors
total.
know that.
So if a
The governors know that. Now, you have a couple of bands of excuse me. You have a couple.
Could you rescind that order?
You have a couple of bands of Democrat governors, but they will agree to it. They will agree to it. But the authority of the President of the United States having to do with the subject we're talking about is total.
Now think about that. The authority of the president is total. He forgot there is a Senate. He forgot there's a Congress. He forgot there is a 10th Amendment. He forgot there's a Supreme Court. No, in this country, we have something called checks and balances. And it's imperative that we all understand that. We have checks and balances, and not even the president has the authority to go past what we do in checks and balances. So folks, when you hear the president talk about, I will be opening up the country, remember this, he cannot open a damn thing. The only thing he can do is coerce people by holding back money and saying, if you don't do this, I won't give you any money. And then that gets resolved in court. So anyhow, what's the program about today? Well, before I get to the program, Professor Eddie Glaude, Princeton Professor Eddie Glaude, he appeared on a show on MSNBC. I don't recall the name of the show right now. And he had some prescient things to say about how coronavirus is affecting minorities, specifically black people. And I want to play this because his prose, I love what Nicole did with him as far as bringing him in to make this talk. I think it's important having him there on MSNBC to make these particular points. I want you to listen to this because, if after listening to this, you don't feel it in the heart that something is wrong in this country with regards to healthcare and the less fortunate, healthcare and minorities, healthcare and the indigent, then something is wrong. But let's go ahead and listen to this, and we'll take it on the other side.
As the coronavirus strains our frontline health workers, though, we continue to track the disproportionate impact it's having on communities of color. In Chicago, African-American residents are now dying from COVID-19 at a rate that's nearly 6 times higher than white residents. 68% of the city's deaths have involved black residents, who only make up about 30% of Chicago's total population. Joining our conversation, the chairman of the Center for African American Studies at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude. Eddie, it's nice to see your face, my friend. It feels like it was a million years ago that we sat around the table and had conversations like this, but never before, I think, have people needed to hear the kind of truths that you speak better than anyone. The statistics speak for themselves, but what do we need to do?
Well, Nicole, I think we need to be honest with ourselves to understand what the virus is revealing about who we are. I think rabid bipartisanship, cruel inequality, crass individualism have in some ways broken the bonds that in some ways forged or shall we say shape our sense of community. And what we see with these disproportionate numbers is that African Americans have had to bear the brunt of our hypocrisy in so many ways. 70% of the deaths in Louisiana, in New Orleans, 70% of the deaths in Chicago, 70% of the deaths in Milwaukee. In my own home state of Mississippi, 72% of the deaths are Black. In my own hometown, 5 out of 6 people have died. 5 out of 6 of the people who are dead have been Black. This is a reflection, in my view, of what, how can I put this? Of what the country has been committed to for a long time. And let me say it really quickly, Nicole. When Hurricane Katrina revealed the disparities, we saw them.
Yes.
When Hurricane Maria revealed the disparities, we saw them.
Yeah.
When the floods revealed the disparity, the floods around the Mississippi revealed the disparities, we saw them. But we didn't change. We said our prayers and we went on about our business. And here we are now with this pandemic revealing our callousness once again.
You know, Eddie, I wonder, I've had this conversation with Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago and Congresswoman Karen Bass yesterday in California. 2 spots that have been proactive, that have done everything that's been asked of them, put in place social distancing orders, worked through the system as it is to try to get the supplies they need. And I'll ask you what I asked them. I mean, can you just, it seems to me that it's almost this braid of 3 toxic, that creates a toxic sort of combination. You know, one is underlying health issues. Basil Smikle talked about that weeks ago, said he's particularly scared because of some of his own underlying health issues. There's economic inequality, which I think is what you're speaking straight to. But I wonder if some of it is also, and if another thing that this virus is revealing, that we don't beat it unless we tackle the weakest links. So there's, right? Like you can have all the money in the world, but if you get on an airplane with the person with the, or you know, walk through an airport where there's someone working there that has it, you are out. You are flattened. So I wonder if there's some blessing in the fact that we don't cure our country, we don't cure our city, we don't cure our workplace of this pandemic until we cure the weakest links, because that weak link can infect everybody else.
Right. I think that's so important, Nicole. We're all on Neurath's boat, as it were. You know, Reverend William Barber of the Poor People's Campaign put it this way: the virus spreads along the breakages in our society. The virus spreads in the breakages of our society. So, you know, when we think about the poorest among us, when we think about those who are incarcerated in jails and in our prisons, when we think about the homeless, right? These are folk who are in our view, who live with us and among us. And if we don't understand that the virus is taking root among the least of these, right? It doesn't matter what your zip code is, right? It doesn't matter whether or not you can live in a gated community. It's going to come to your doorstep.
Yeah.
The richest nation in the world has experienced over 7,000 deaths. The most cosmopolitan place in the world is dealing with unimaginable grief. And there are folks who are literally languishing on the underside of this, on the underbelly of this country, who are experiencing it at another register. Let me say this really quickly. The Great Recession of 2008, Black folk and people of color bore the brunt of it primarily. The entire gains of the 90s were wiped out in 2008 in Black America. And now look where we are now. My God.
Now, before you've heard all of that, I don't need to go over that again. But the one thing that I want to go over is this: Nicole is a Republican, and Nicole gets it that if one person is sick, they can potentially pass that on to others. So she gets it. She gets that, and I'm happy that she gets that. However, there's an issue that I am very disappointed in her about. And I want you to think about this. Her reason for wanting to help the indigent, helping the least among us in this pandemic per se, at least in this particular issue, was because her not healing them may make others sick. You see, in other words, she isn't coming from the point of view that healthcare is a right. She isn't coming from the point of view as what have you done, what you've done to the least of us. She's coming from the point of view that I want to heal you so you don't get me sick. The difference between her and Eddie Glaude in that particular aspect is Eddie Glaude is saying, I want to heal you because I love you. I want to heal you because you're another human being. And I don't know if necessarily Nicole wanted to say that. Probably not. Maybe it just came across that way. But that is the Republican narrative. In order for us to spend something on you, in order for us to give you something, there must be something in return. Completely aside from what just being humane is all about. And again, maybe I'm taking that a little bit out of context. I'm pretty sure she's a nice person, but it always irks me when I hear. I mean, I've used that narrative of as far as to try to talk to Republicans why they should have Medicare for all, why even the undocumented should have health care. I mean, after all, I've told you a story about an American girl from Las Vegas. They couldn't diagnose her there because her insurance wouldn't allow the test. She flew to Italy. Italy took care of her completely free of charge because they have a public system. They found what was wrong with her and gave her what she needed to do to be cured. But when you think, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit after we talk a little bit about capitalism with, well, I tell you what, let's go ahead and get into what the narrative of the program is going to be, and then I'll go there because it's so very important. Title of the show today is actually COVID-19 Exposes American Capitalism. Daniel Cohen, second part, Daniel Cohen on reopening the economy. And I said reopening the economy. Daniel thinks we shouldn't be using the words reopening the economy, for which I concur. Daniel J. Cohen discusses the realities of reopening the economy. We will discuss how COVID-19 exposes the fallacy within American capitalism. COVID-19 exposed the biggest exposers for unfettered capitalism. It exposed the inhumanity that accompanies capitalism as practiced in the United States. Not only has it caused massive debts indirectly, but it is in the process of destroying the personal economies of middle class and poor America. Is this the end of capitalism as we know it? Well, Indivisible Houston President Daniel Cohen in the second half will discuss the perils of reopening the economy like a faucet. He will discuss his most recent article titled, "We Can't Just Turn the Economy Back On. We Must Adapt." To get started, I want you to listen to this piece by Stephanie Ruhl. This is a wonderful piece, and we'll take it on the other side.
Go higher up the economic food chain, and you actually have healthcare workers who are getting their pay cut, who are working in hospital systems owned by private equity giants like KKR. You've got healthcare professionals who are suffering. Yet those private equity giants who are supposed to be in a position where they take all sorts of risk, and when you take big risk, you could get lots of upside, but you risk facing great downside. And right now, the government is stepping in and curbing that downside. We're having capitalism on the way up and self-imposed socialism on the way down.
You're absolutely right, Stephanie. It's rugged individualism and capitalism and the Hunger Games on the way up. And then on the way down, it's a lot of call signs by CEOs that we're in this together and sort of a hallmark channel like socialism. We need to decide if we're capitalists, meaning that if you take incredible risks, there's incredible upside. But if you could use 96% of your free cash flow to buy back stock, thereby inflating your compensation and the compensation of the CEO and the directors, and you don't have any cash when a crisis hits, should you be in fact be allowed to fail? And what private equity and CEOs are trying to convince us of right now is they're conflating equity destruction with job destruction. And the reality is, and I know this personally, when your company declares Chapter 11, a lot of times there isn't job loss, there's just a wipeout of equity. So all of a sudden we're in this together. We need to decide if we're capitalists, meaning that equity gets wiped out on the way down, or if we're socialists. But if we're going to be socialists, and let's be honest, socialism, a lot of people say that's a better alternative. 5 of the 7 happiest nations in the world have socialism. You want your universal pre-K, you want your universal health. But let's not have capitalism on the way up. And then when we hit a crisis, we have the worst type of socialism. We have cronyism. And that is the people with the most representation in Washington, the people with the most economic power, decide all of a sudden that we're in this together. And as soon as the markets start going back up,
Okay,
you're going to
then,
hear
Scott,
talks about capitalism and rugged individualism.
Then quickly before we go, why is the government listening to them? We are seeing CEOs of gig economy companies urging the government to provide those Uber and Lyft drivers health care and government support. Yet those companies never paid into the system and made any of those people employees, so they never paid a payroll tax. How could they ask this of the government?
That's the correct question. Amazon has over 100 full-time lobbyists in D.C., not lobbying for higher minimum wage, but lobbying for absence from regulation. And by the way, let's talk about the companies with the most essential workers who pay them anywhere between $12 and $15 an hour. It's Amazon and Walmart. And it's no accident, Stephanie, that today, those stocks hit an all-time high. You're obviously referring to Uber. Uber's now worth more than the entire U.S. auto industry. The U.S. auto industry pays people an average of $27 an hour, guaranteed their health care benefits. They're still making money. Uber right now has people putting themselves in harm's way. They get clocked out when they don't make any money. Somewhere between a quarter and a third of them make below minimum wage. But we've decided those are the new innovators. We have a decision to make. Do we want to have a ride-hailing economy where people are vulnerable, or do we want to have an old economy like Gestalt or approach where we say there's a dignity in work, and quite frankly, shareholders aren't going to reap as much of the pie, but workers, the middle class, the people who have made this country great, the people bringing us our groceries are going to do better. There's going to be more dignity in work. This requires structural, fundamental change.
Structural, fundamental change. Absolutely so. And, so we have to understand this. Capitalism, as we practice it, capitalism in general, it knows or has no humanity, no heart. Remember what I tell this show after show. It believes in the tenet of whatever the market will bear. And what will the market bear? Your total income plus the total amount of credit you have access to. And that's it. And if you are past that number, your total income plus the total access to credit, the next part comes stealing. Because if you have to have, for some reason, for some people, if you have to have, that's the next step. That is what capitalism, that is a tenet, right? But then also the other things that it has no future as far as thinking past the future. Think about this. The coronavirus is here. The stockpiles that we should have of equipment for a pandemic, which we understand given the level of travel that occurs in this world, would actually explode, was not there. And the reason why is equipment staying in storage. Equipment that's just sitting down there makes no money. So therefore, capitalism does not work well in the medical field, where there may be times that a lot of things that you do is rather inefficient for the times when you do need it. Ironically speaking, the loss that we are going to have in economic activity is going to be much larger than having just stocked away all these things into storage. But of course, there are going to be some winners. Think about this. In as much as the United States had already commissioned the creation of these ventilators that cost about $2,500 a piece, New York is paying anywhere between $25,000 and $50,000 because since they're bidding against their federal government and other states, the capitalist structure says we will give the highest bidder. And are you willing to pay more? Are you willing to pay more? Are you willing to pay more? Until the price goes up, whatever the market will bear. And if you need it, you'll pay whatever. If the government had it in storage, or if the government also had regulations that said this will not cost more than XYZ. Why? Not price controls on everything, but if you want to have a private sector somehow involved in something that's public, then the least you should have is very tight controls. The truth of the matter is, it shouldn't be, period. You should not have the private sector involved in healthcare, because healthcare for profit means healthcare denied, or healthcare for the rich. No two ways about it. Now, the fact that we have people that don't have MMEs, they don't have the safety equipment, they don't have all these things. They're causing more debts. That is what this type of economic system brings. These guys are not doing anything wrong. When they go to Donald Trump and make a deal, when they hold back masks, when they rip off masks from each other for profit, that is by definition the system. And it works well if you're selling gasoline, if it works well if you're selling slippers, it works well if you're selling donuts. But for things that we need as a society, we should never, ever allow an economic system that has no soul. You cannot have an economic system that by design has no soul. Its sole purpose to make a profit for the shareholder, and the amount of profit it makes for the shareholder is based on whatever the market will bear. Folks, understand that. Now, when it comes to socialism versus capitalism, it is funny because, as explained perfectly in that piece, it is interesting because recently a friend of mine had a message on my Facebook page, and I actually loved it so much that I placed it in a newsletter, and I wish I could find it right now. But as it turns out, what these guys are looking for is socialism on the way down. In other words, oh, here comes the virus. It's so bad. The virus is so bad. Look at what it's doing to us. Which is true. The virus is bad and it's doing a whole lot of bad things. But here is the real issue. The real issue is, well, why didn't you are taking risks. That is what you do by design. A system rewards you for taking risks. But when the risks come, you want to offload it to people. When you decide to raise your prices, you don't give the people a break. When Donald Trump wanted to raise the prices of gasoline, the prices of petroleum to save a few petroleum jobs, as opposed to saving the money of millions of Americans, he chose to save the jobs of a few people in the petroleum industry. But actually, he was really saving the petroleum companies that really cannot make money at the current price of a barrel of oil. That's not capitalism. That is socialism for corporations. But anyhow, we are getting to the time now where we need to get to the next subject, which is Daniel Cohen. And Daniel Cohen will talk to us about reopening the economy. He has some other thoughts on that. He doesn't believe we should talk about opening the economy or reopening it because it was never closed. Here's it. Check it out. Welcome to another segment of Politics Done Right. Today I have the honor of speaking to Daniel J. Cohen. Daniel is a Houston activist and the president of Indivisible Houston. Daniel, welcome aboard once again. You are one of our regulars. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. You know, all things considered, I'm a fortunate person. How are you doing?
I am doing fine. I mean, one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on is you wrote a hell of an article for Medium, of course, which I went ahead and reprinted at egbertowillies.com about the reopening of the government, the responsibility and all that sort of thing. I want to first show folks the article. You guys need to just get online and go to either Medium or egbertowillies.com and look for that article titled, "We Can't Just Turn the Economy Back On. We Must Adapt." A very insightful article by Daniel. Daniel, why don't you tell me a little bit about your thoughts of what's going on right now with this stuff about reopening the government and all of that?
I think there's a bipartisan failure actually in terms of discussing this. And I think that it's intentional on one side, and I think the other side's getting duped. So let's talk a little bit about what an economy is. An economy is when you have trade. In modern terms, it's usually tethered in some sense to a currency, right? So if you supply, there's a demand, I trade a resource for currency or vice versa, that's what an economy is. And it's not that much more complicated than that in terms of a baseline of what an economy is. So when we say the economy needs to be turned back on, I say to myself, well, I don't think that the economy ever got turned off. You can't really turn an economy off like with a It's not like you pull a ripcord and the thing either moves or it doesn't move. It's not a lawnmower. It's constant trade that's going on. So, is the economy off? Well, I mean, there's still trade. You're still, people, if you watch TV, if you've got a TV and you can turn on cable or whatever. So you can't really turn the economy back on like it's a lawnmower. It doesn't start with a ripcord. So I say, is the economy off? Well, you can't really turn it off. So the answer is no. If it were off, like if you actually had no economic activity or anything like that, the way that would work is a lot different than this. People wouldn't be able to turn on their TV and see commercials or anything like that. There wouldn't be people who had deliveries of food to their house and stuff like that. There'd be people who are trying to figure out, like even a step below this, right, would be people with wheelbarrows full of currency that was hyperinflated, that they were like taken to a market 15 miles away or something like that. Like, we're not even where that is, right? So there's still stuff that's going on. What people are really saying is that a lot of people are out of work, that we have high unemployment, that we've had a lot of people's retirements take a hit because the market fell, and that things are bad, right? And that generally speaking, the economy is not in good shape right now because we've had this event that has been largely mismanaged and partly leveled at us by nature or whatever. So what all of these politicians are doing right now is falling in line with what the White House wants us to say, which is, hey, the economy's off, we got to turn it back on, which is a code word for end social distancing so that people can go back into movie theaters and things like that. That's really what they're talking about when they say reopen the economy, is like allowing people to come back together physically, which of course we know is really, really bad when it comes to the COVID issue. And it's a shame that a lot of Democratic governors have picked up the same language, and so is the CDC, that everybody's talking about this like it's a light switch. They talk about open or reopen, or it's turned off, we need to turn it back on, or people need to go back. They talk about it like it's a binary, and it's very, very dangerous to do that. And that's really, if I could stress that more than anything else throughout our conversation, is when you hear somebody say turn it back on, or it's turned off, or we need to get people back, like, stop thinking of it as black or white. We need to be adapting our economy in the meantime so that we can bridge where we are now to what it will be like as we come up with all of the medical adjustments that we need to come up with so that we can come out the other side of this. There was a survey with Chicago economists, it was a survey conducted by Booth in Chicago of economists from leading institutions around the United States, and 100% of them said, if you reopen businesses that should be closed too early, you get worse medical outcomes and you get worse economic outcomes. So you really can't sidestep this thing. There's nothing you can do.
Not to cut you right there, I want to interrupt for one reason. Japan has just found that out, because Japan's has come back worse than it was in the beginning. But here's the interesting thing, and I want us to get back on this subject, but you opened the door for a very important statement. You said that we are being played. Always seems that when we talk about narrative, that the Democrats allow themselves to get played by the narrative. Can you explain why that is? I mean, we got played by throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We got played by throwing grandma off the cliff, when we are the ones who had we always have the narrative of humanity. We always have the narrative that the policies that we want are what's good for human beings. How do we always allow them to turn it around?
I think the best thing to do is reject the premise of the question, right? Instead of accepting the premise and trying to go toe to toe with what people are saying. And so, we always get caught flat-footed. If I were going to reject the premise of that question, right, then I would say, there have been lots of progressive voices who have been able to get out in front of the hard right over time. And I think that, when it comes to the question, when are we going to reopen the economy? I think the answer should be, look, the economy right now is rough because certain industries are closed, certain industries are shut down, certain businesses are not going well. We have to find adaptations for those businesses, because otherwise what we're going to wind up with is a worse economy, and we're going to wind up with more people sick and more people dead. And that's what the White House is trying to do. So, there's this.
I like that. I would preface the first part and say, when they said we need to reopen the economy, no, the economy never closed.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't close. I mean, it's a closed down economy. I mean, really, if you think this is bad, I mean, things can get a heck of a lot worse. And a closed down economy is like worse than the Great Depression because it literally means that there's no trade whatsoever. If you've got no economy, then you have no order at that point, and then people aren't getting anything that they need. And by saying we need to reopen the economy, it's a double whammy, right? Because one, they get to put people back into unsafe positions, right? Thereby leading to the more sickness, more death, and worse economic outcomes, that they've been that I mentioned before. And then two, they get to avoid the really hard conversation, which is how are we going to get people back to work in a safe way? How are we going to come up with programs that actually help businesses and people that are hurting right now get back to where they're going? How can we come up with a medical game plan that leads to widespread testing, that leads to therapy, that leads to a vaccine, that actually takes on the problem that's in front of us? Like, those are the hard questions that leaders right now are not doing a great job at large of answering. Some are doing better than others, but at large, they're not doing a great job of addressing them altogether. So we let them off the hook by asking an oversimplified question. Which is when are we going to turn it back on again? What do you mean by turning it back on? You're saying, when am I going to jam a stadium full of 60,000 people? You got a long time to wait for that, right? So if you directly answer that, then what you're going to get labeled with is they're going to call you a naysayer for saying that. So instead, you have to reject the premise of the question. You have to head it off at the past, and that's the way that the politically speaking, left voices can start addressing this BS talking point.
Now, Daniel, what you're saying, while smart, should be quite evident. Is there some reason that you see why the left, you said caught flat-footed, why they always seem to be caught flat-footed? Why is that? I mean, we have a lot of intelligence on our side.
Well, I mean, there's a few things. One, I mean, getting people who, people on the right, when they go to college, they major in business and marketing and accounting and things like that. And people on the left in college are majoring in sociology. And there's nothing wrong with majoring in sociology, but there's something about that when it comes to politics, which is a lot of the majors that we lean into are the ones that focus on how you answer questions about the world and how you can get to the right answer. And when you're in a major like that, then you're going to talk in a more complicated way because the world is complicated and the challenges that you face are complicated. Whereas if you're in the realm of business, you're trying to figure out how to put your unique selling proposition in 8 words so that you can sell whatever product or service it is that you're trying to move out the door. So there's something about the nature of it too, and the nature of the field and the nature of sort of the skill sets that people are going into. I've long been a proponent of people on the left learning how to think in terms of power resource structuring, project management, and kind of understanding how power resources move around, because I think that they can do a little bit better. The other piece of that, though, is that we don't speak in sound bites, right? Like that's the short version of it. We don't really speak in sound bites. We're trying to solve the problem, and the problem doesn't get solved in sound bites because complicated questions require complicated answers, and complicated answers are longer than an 8-second sound bite, and that's the way that it is. But you also have to realize the arena that you're in a given moment. And if you're inside of the political arena, then you need to adjust yourself and kind of move it that way. The strongest actual left voice in terms of somebody turning things into sound bites that are effective is Bernie Sanders. I would love to see that sort of power resource thinking move to the rest of progressive voices, which includes a lot of people who are big Bernie Sanders supporters, to really kind of pick up where he left off and use that. And it's not just about language and communication. It's also about what strategy you take on. I'm gonna throw this. I'm gonna kick the hornet's nest here because I realize I'm on Politics Done Right. So I imagine somebody will take issue to this, but I'm gonna say it right. I work with third party and independent voters all the time, right? You want to mess around on, or you want to push on ICE abolition, and you want to work together on all this other stuff. There's lots of ways that we can collaborate and work together. The problem is a lot of the talking points surrounding a third party strategy for this year were used in the year 2000. I mean, these are completely outdated. The Green Party didn't have its stuff together as recently as 4 to 6 years ago. Their website date. And so they're not thinking in terms of power resource management. They're just thinking about it like it strikes me as an art project, or like they're out of touch with how power resources actually move. That's not an endorsement of the center. You know what I think about them. A lot of the policy they're pushing are really bad for working class people. And so I don't support that either, but you have to show people a way forward in terms of strategy. So to tie it back to the original point, why are people getting caught flat-footed? Because they don't think about it in terms of a power game. They don't think about it in terms of fighting. They're thinking about it in terms of the world that they want to see. And while that is useful for answering the big questions, you got to be able to change your feet and kind of shift modes depending on where you are.
Absolutely. So then you just made an important thing. You want to, in effect, you want to change the paradigm of discourse that we use right now. And in order to do that, we have to have a learning proposition. I know you've been actively working on that with the kind of people you bring into Indivisible Houston. I know you've had trainings on how to reach different population sets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How can you grow that? How can we expand on that so that these terms like opening the economies, these terms as throwing mommy out with the bathwater, all these different things that they are very effective of doing. How do we do that en masse? I know independent media is one way. Coming on here and telling your story is one way. But there ought to be another way to actually train leaders to become the Daniel Cohens, the Nisha Randalls of this world.
I mean, I think that there are some good trainings out there that are working on some of that. I do think that we need to make them more accessible. I think that there is room for us to take a little bit of a harder look in the mirror when it comes to where we miss on some of this stuff, right? Because we don't control, for example, if somebody is going to not play fair, right, and they've got the keys, there's not a lot we can do other than point it out, call it out, and kind of fight back against it. But we don't have if we don't have the keys, then we're not able to actually adjust how the engine is running, right? So so what we can do though is work on our own stuff and work on the strategies that we're taking on. And I think that it's back to old school organizing.
I need to stop you a second because you are a professional activist. You know all the works is. I think you need to explain to folks when you say why we have to work from within our clique, if you will, because we don't have the keys. Explain what you mean by we don't have the keys.
That's a good point. Look at me. I'm talking abstract right now. I'm breaking my own rules. But look, what I'm saying is that, we obviously could do a better job of selling left ideas to people. And that doesn't depend on whether or not entirely at least, on whether or not like corporate media shuts down a talking point or whether or not we're not being given a fair shake in our own hometown newspaper. If we do a bad job of selling our ideas, then that's on us, right? Like if we use the wrong pitch, that's on us. If we're pushing people away, that's on us. If we can't build coalitions because we're so angry about this one thing that we can't find a way to work over here with somebody on something else, that's kind of on us. So there are certain things we do have to take responsibility for. It's not a matter of pull yourself up by your bootstraps style responsibility, but it is a matter of making sure that you're continuously improving. Because if you're always saying, this person stopped me, this person kept me from doing this, it's whatever entity you want to pick, whatever it might be, it's Cuomo, it's a DNC, whatever it is, then you never take a moment to look internally and say, well, how can I do this better? How can I actually get the word out a little bit better to other people? The less that we spend focusing on the talking points of the opposition and of the people who have goals that conflict with ours, and buying it, then the less we're going to be buying into their frames and buying into their limitations. So we definitely need to kind of look inward and think, okay, how can we do a little bit better? What kind of trainings can we set up? Where am I falling short in terms of reaching out to communities that I'm not necessarily connected to, particularly in a time when I can't physically go to another part of town very easily, and certainly can't go and talk to people I've never talked to before or knock on their doors. We really have to kind of look inward on a lot of that stuff and figure out how we can be a little bit better about it, because repeating the same song over and over again, I mean, if for the next 7 months, the left spends, several hours a day, like hammering away at the DNC without any forward momentum, we're going to have missed a huge opportunity to make progress, and the kind of opportunity to make progress that Bernie has been talking about throughout his entire run and that Elizabeth Warren has talked about for a lot of her run as well. We can't just get caught in a loop when it comes to these conversations. We have to move to the next leg of the conversation, which is why we need to move from reopening the economy and that kind of talking point to adapt the economy, make it different, make it so that there's forward momentum, there are forward solutions. Because if we get back into a back and forth where they're saying, pack the stadiums, and we're saying, don't reopen it, it's too early, then we're going to be caught in that same loop. I think just being conscious of these communication loops can go really, really far, and think to yourself, what can I do to actually improve the way that I advocate or what I do on a regular basis?
I love that. I had a show, I think it's 2 or 3 shows ago, where that is pretty much what I've said, and not what I've said. It's a sort of a parallel thing where I said that COVID-19 presents an opportunity for us because a lot of things we're going to be building from, I don't want to say building from scratch, but building to where it wasn't before. We have input into how this is going to be built. So therefore, let's create the map. Right now, we have a whole lot of lobbyists in town. They are trying to create it in their favor, the way it's going to run for them. We have an opportunity now to push that out the way. And I love the way you said that. In other words, don't talk about it's too early to open the stadium. Talk about how are we going to open the stadium. Don't talk about, that we can't afford this. Talk about why we need to afford this and why the money is there to afford all these different items. Don't talk about and that's what those are the things that I'm trying to put out lately, and that is, let's be the ones leading the conversation.
You do a great job, especially on healthcare, because I know that's
my pet peeve, yeah.
But it really is. It's a great example in terms of rejecting the premise of the question, right? Is that they say, how are you going to pay for it? You want to see how we're paying for it now? Why don't you turn on any news station, and they'll tell you all day how we're paying for it. We basically put somebody into a meat grinder, and then what comes out the other side of that is the economic outcome, right? Which is decide not to pay for their treatment, and so we get a dead person for it. But at the end of the day, to even further reject the premise of the question, our healthcare system is more expensive because of the current model. The way that we would pay for it is by adjusting to a new model that allows for everybody to get care for less money overall, because you have a single pool. So you want to know how we pay for it? We change away from this stupid system that gets nobody care for exorbitant fees. Where we are right now is absolutely not a system that we should support. So we should move to a system that's going to cost less money. And they say, well, where are you going to come up with the money for that system? You say, I don't know, maybe we should use some of the resources that we just wasted over here. It's going to cost less money. So you ask, pay for it. I don't know. How do you afford something that costs less? You spend less money on it. It's not a complicated question. But what's even better about it is you get better health outcomes out of it. You have a more dignified system where people are actually able to live and you can recognize their humanity. You get better quality of life out of it. Nobody's digging for coupons online. Trish Robinson, the wonderful Indivisible Liberty County organizer, founder, said the other day that she asked, she said, hey, this is a $900 prescription. I saw there was a coupon for it before. Do you think there's one available? And they said, look, the pharmacist is like, yeah, I don't know, check the website. You might see another one. She looks on the website. There's a coupon for it. She uses a coupon. She gets it for free. If she had never asked the question, she would have paid $900.
Yes.
So, how is Trish Robinson supposed to afford that? How is somebody who doesn't know where the coupon's supposed to afford that? You want to ask me how we can afford it? How can anyone afford this brutal, exorbitant?
Inhumane.
It's entirely inhumane. So yeah, the way you do it with healthcare is a great example of how you can kind of change the frame, but it's every single issue. I'll give you another one right now. We are currently seeing the biggest drop in carbon emissions.
Oh yes.
And years, right? We're seeing this enormous drop in carbon emissions. And so, people, how could we afford that? I don't know how we could ever do that. I guess if everybody stayed inside, technically, the emissions would lower and then you'd be able to, right? Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be moving around again. I'd love to see people moving around again. And I think, I'm not opposed to, again, someday some people driving cars. But I think it does reframe a lot of the conversations about what we do on a regular basis. People want, a boss wants somebody to come into an office. All right, so now we have the cost of carbon emissions, 1. We've got their costs coming and going, their time costs, so that's 2. So now they're more tired, so they can't take care of their kids. That's 3. So now their kids, of course, have struggles when it comes to, that's more time taken away from them when it comes to being a family, to education, to solving the challenges that are in front of them, their quality of life at home. They're going to be burned out. They're going to be less effective on their jobs. They're not going to be able to create the same economic output when they're at work in the first place. Not to mention everybody's got traffic jams. So they got extra stress because of that. Like, there's so many different things that come out of this. And then you stack the emissions issue on top of it. If you want to make advances when it comes to energy preservation and sustainability, just take some of the lessons of what we're learning by looking outside. And that's what I mean by adapting the economy, is that we're learning all of these things through an experiment that would be entirely inhumane to set up. But nature set it up.
Did it for us. You know what is interesting? What is interesting is I said on a couple shows, or probably 3 shows ago, that a lot of people want things to be the way they were before. Let's say we found a vaccine, and I can go. I'm from a Latin Caribbean culture. We hug a lot, but we can't do that anymore. Okay, so let's say that we come back. People say we want things to be the way before, and we have a vaccine now, so we can do it. The thing about it, I think people are going to realize it, and I realize it myself. Is that a simpler life can be non-stressing. It can be wonderful for your credit card bill. It can be. There are so many things that came out of seeing this, and a lot of companies are also going to notice, hey, these folks can work at home efficiently, taking care of their kids and working in between those spare times. Maybe we can create a work schedule that looks like that. There's so much that's coming out of this. Why I say real estate companies are likely to lose a lot of money, because a lot of companies are going to realize they could make more money even if their total amount of money is dropped. The reason that they don't have an electric bill and they don't have all these other bills makes it make sense to have a different modal. And I think this could change a lot.
It really could. A lot of the companies, look, this is not an endorsement of any of these companies, but just to look at their model, right? Like, Amazon starts as this book, this peer-to-peer sale, right, company. And the idea was, like, if I got a book I want to sell it for $7, and, you're in, I don't know, like Morocco, right? And, you want the book, then I can sell it to you for $7, and they'll ship it over, and it'll be affordable at the end of the day. And people go, that's great. What are you, out of your mind? You'd never be able to get it for that cheap. That's a logistical issue. Logistical issues can be solved, right? If your biggest problem fiscal issues, you can kind of figure them out, because you figure out how to move things, and then you make them cheaper, because usually there was some glut that was built in. That's how you see rideshare programs. That's how you see Airbnb. That's how you see some of the office share programs now that are out there, which are basically for offices. Of course, they're probably not doing well at the very moment, because there aren't people having meetings face to face. But the point is that people made a lot of money just saying, why would we do it this way to begin with? Before.
Exactly.
So, I mean, now there's definitely, there's no reason for us to just like cling on to the world the way that it was before. So people were already thinking of doing things differently than they were doing before. So they're thinking about overcoming these logistical challenges as before. So now that some of the things that we saw in front of us have been reduced or have been narrowed, right? Or the way we think about it has been shrunk a little bit. Maybe you don't go out and see live music, right? You don't go out to a bar and you order a beer and watch your favorite band, but instead you got a 6-pack at home. You're streaming or something like that. There's a guy named DJ Mel who's been like running living room sets, and people are dancing in their living room and stuff like that. It's not going to be forever, but it's certainly a way that it's going to be adjusted for a while here. So we need to be we should always be thinking proactively about how we can change things and make them better anyway. And this is an even more important time to do it. So instead of getting stuck in this old mindset that's a flawed mindset of like, well, how do we get back to there? We should be thinking, all right, well, where do we go from here? Where do we go forward? What's going to change, and what should that look like?
Daniel, isn't that the definition of progress, the first part of progressive?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thinking of a different way to do things and moving forward and finding progress. It's always best if you can find a way to combine the timeless concepts with the new ideas and how to implement them, then you get the best policy.
That's it. I like the way you said that. The timeless with moving forward, because there are in fact things that are timeless and moving forward. Daniel J. Cohen, Houston, premier Houston activist and president of Indivisible Houston. It's been my pleasure to have you on Politics Done Right once again, sir. I think it's an honor to have young people like yourselves doing the kind of work that needs to get done to move us forward, sir.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on your show, man, and thank you for being a member of the Free and Independent Press. I always thank you for that, and I always appreciate it, Egberto.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Folks, I hope you enjoyed that. But look, I want to remind you that this is a political show that requires your support. Please go to store.politicsdoneright.com. Again, that is store.politicsdoneright.com, and check what you have on the screen. A whole lot of different products that we sell to help us raise the funds necessary to continue this program. Without you, we simply could not do it. Some people like to get a little something for their donation. So when you buy our cups, I support independent media, or you buy our t-shirts, or you get our books specifically. As I see it, Class Warfare, the only resort to right-wing doom. It's a great book that teaches you a whole lot about the economy, and it's about health. You know, I got pretty darn sick, with this activism and not taking care of myself, so I decided, lose weight and be fit now. It's a good book. Not only that, it tells you the tribulations that I went through. It's a very human book that tells you what I went through to keep my weight off and to stay healthy. All of that you can get at store.politicsdoneright.com, store.politicsdoneright.com. And with every purchase that you're making at our store, you are ensuring that we can continue with Politics Done Right. You're ensuring that we can continue giving the independent message. If you want to become a subscriber, and we need patrons to this show. It starts at $1.99. It's very, very, very inexpensive. Would you outside buy Politics Done Right a cup of coffee? Would you buy me a cup of coffee, a couple of cup of coffees a month? Yeah, I'm pretty sure you would, because, we would sit down and discuss and have fun all the time. Like I come and I discuss with you guys 5 days a week. We'll have fun. A cup of coffee to have a conversation. I know if I saw you in Starbucks, or if I saw you wherever, you'd say, Egberto, let's have a cup of coffee. Well, that's what subscribing to Politics Done Right is all about. Please go to patreon.com/politicsdoneright. That is patreon.com/politics done right. Again, that is patreon.com/politics done right. If you want to make a contribution to the show of however little or however much, go to paypal.me/politics done right. Again, that is paypal.me/politics done right. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please feel free to super chat this show so that we can really do what we need to get done, get the independent message out. Folks, I love you. I appreciate you. I am very humbled by you spending this time listening to Politics Done Right, so that we together can actually be enlightened, so that we can together be empowered and really, really start ensuring that other Americans start to empower themselves, so that we all vote our interests and not the interests of those who care nothing about us, care nothing really about the country. My name is Egberto Willies, and you know how I end this program. I am what? Out! I'm Egberto Willies, host of Politics Done Right, an independent news program. I post several news videos of interest every day. I ask you so kindly to subscribe to my channel, and please leave me some comments. Thank you very much.